All right, it must be Saturday night at 5:30 in West Kelowna, BC. I'm here at you live for tonight's session. And as we wait for the numbers, usually I was planning on telling a few stories while I wait for people to get on board because of the delay, stories or examples or things like that have gone on in the last week or so. So I'm going to get into that. I just have to say, this first thing that I'm going to rant on a little bit that really ticked me off. I should be more aware of what goes on with social media and how things are, but I get a lesson every so often. So a lot of the times, what I don't see happening, and when I do research, I read books and I read studies, and people send me studies and things like that. And that's where I get my information from. So oftentimes for me, I'm always scratching my head on why there can be so much confusion out there in terms of what people are paying attention to or what they're confused about, things like that, diets that work, diets that don't, information that I take for granted now, those kind of things. So, and it came to me by looking. I was social media, of course. I was on social media for a particular reason. And one of the things that really ticked me off, and I'm going to try not to share any names here because I don't want to give them any attention. But I ended up on one of the most popular podcasts on the net. And that was what's disappointing about it, because this is how misinformation and disinformation gets spread. Because it was one of the most popular podcasts on the net, of course, it got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. And it was a podcast interviewing, well, for lack of a better word, a complete moron about his 1 year anniversary or whatever, been dieting 1 year on meat only. And as I listened to this, I couldn't believe the amount of nonsense spewing out of this guy's mouth. A lot of conjecture, a lot of supposition, no research to prove anything, nothing to back him up. It was an actual doctor, blah, blah, blah. But obviously he wasn't vetted for what he was about to say. No one researched his background. And this is how misinformation and disinformation gets spread, because people listen to podcasts along in their car or whatever. They don't have time later to go check out someone's credentials or what they're doing. And this guy said all kinds of nonsense. And I'm not even going to get into the kind of nonsense he was saying. But other people who are online with big followings as well jumped on it. And of course, they provided a critique and a response to what this moron had to say. One of them even found out that he had lost his medical license, even though he still calls himself a doctor. No surprise there. And the people that were debunking him with research, with actual research, and posted, up on the screen like I often do, were being attacked. So They can find little pieces of shoddy research here and there to make very broad-based claims of nothing and get a following doing that. And it was just really, really disappointing to see that, because hundreds of thousands of people were listening to this podcast and taking these things as truth when they're nothing but truth. And I would even doubt that he was even telling the truth, that he was been on a meat-only diet for a year, because he didn't strike me as being truthful because of all the nonsense that he was spewing. He struck me as a Donald Trump type, that he'll just spew whatever comes to his mind. So, and then the people who did catch up with what he had to say and offered resistance in the forms of informed, educated academic opinion and research were the ones being attacked. It makes no sense to me, but that's the nature of social media. And it was a good lesson for me when people get their information from social media. And that's what always confused me, because I get mine from research that people send me and studies that I do and books that I read. So I don't have that nonsense interplay going on that most people do have. So it's a real warning sign out there as to what can go on and how it goes on. And it was a real shocker to me. And like I said, I don't want to give it a name and say who it was, because why give them any publicity? There's been a few people who write me and ask me, well, will I talk about this diet or will I talk about this person's diet? And then I look it up and I'm like, no, I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to draw any attention to these idiots who are spewing complete nonsense out there. And then, of course, seeing what I see myself a couple times on YouTube this week, I had to delete some comments that were directed at me. And just personal attacks based upon what I had to say about keto and the rest. And it's funny that people will accuse you of not having studies or being biased when you're presenting actual studies. So it's head shaking out there what goes on. So still waiting for the numbers to build up, and I'm going to do a question and answer session for people out there. But I had a couple other examples I wanted to use this week. I had someone, as most of you know, you can go to my website and you can order a one-time custom diet or a one-time custom program if you're not going to sign up for coaching or whatever. And I had some lady order a one-time custom diet from me. And this is a good lesson, a good story for me to tell. So I went through her assessment information and I looked at the type of job she does that interferes with the potential to eat the way you would want to eat in terms of regimentation and time and things like that. And after looking at everything that she does, I wrote her back and said, I'm giving you your money back. I did a couple little tweaks on the diet she sent, because when people order a diet from me, they have to give me a 3-day history of what they eat and things like that. And I wrote her back and said, I'm giving you your money back because I can't create a diet strategy for you that's any better than the one you're doing. And I think it's a story worth telling, because I think as she went to 10 other people would have taken her money and given her a diet, but the diet wouldn't have been any better. It just would have been different. And this is what I explained to her, and I wasn't going to take her money just to give her something back that's different, but not better than what she's already doing. And I think too much of that goes on in the industry. And it was a good lesson also for me, because it was one of those opportunities where I could empower somebody and I could say, look, you're already doing something right. There's no way to be perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about, is this optimal? Is this good? Is this best? So I wrote her and said, you're doing great. The couple little tweaks that I would make, do this instead of this. I'm not going to charge you for that because it doesn't make any sense for that. But way to go. You figured it out, and you did as good a job as I could do. And most people at that point, I think, had she went to anyone else, they would have gladly taken her money and sent her something back, but it wouldn't have been better than what she was already doing. That's what assessment is for, and that's what real and true professionals will be for. Most of the time, I can improve on something enough to do the one-time custom diet, one-time custom program. But in this particular case, the lady had it right. She just needed the confidence in someone to give her the confidence that, hey, you're doing a good job, and you did, I can't do it any better than what you're doing it. So that's important stuff to know. So, like I said, had she ordered a diet from 10 other so-called experts online, they all would have taken her money probably and sent her a diet, but it wouldn't have been better than what she was doing. It just would have been different. And that's not what one-time custom services should be about. So that's important stuff. I'll get to your comments soon. Well, numbers are a little light today. So I think that's a good example as well. And then last week I talked about, I asked you guys about why, what's the draw? Why do women want to compete? And some of you answered during the live session, and some of you didn't. And the ones who didn't, a lot of people wrote me afterwards and wanted to give me an email to answer the question, because they didn't want to put their names to it in a live session or have it be, on my YouTube channel and stuff. They don't mind me using their answer. They just didn't want it to be on the live show with their name attached to it. So here, I'm going to read you a couple of these because they're interesting, and I think they talk a lot about what's going on. So One of the letters just says, "Hey, coach, I just watched your Facebook Live webinar and you asked why. Why? What's the attraction for women to compete?" I didn't comment on the page because my reasons are personal. Don't want to share it with everyone. That makes good sense. Hope you don't mind me sending you this email. You can use it, but without my name. It took me some time to figure out my why. It was a good question. But the bottom line is I competed for the attention. All of it boils down to self-esteem, always feeling like an outcast, not many friends, and a whole lot of other personal and past issues. All of a sudden, it felt so good. All the feedback and attention I was posting on my onstage competition pictures on Facebook, my diet, etc. It was the most acknowledgement I had ever received, and it kept me wanting more. So I ended up doing 3 contests in a year. What a dumbass. Did it help any of my above mentioned issues of self-esteem, etc.? Nope. Now I'm right back to where I started, and now with the added stress of dealing with all the post competition, diet, weight rebound, and self-image issues. What scares me the most about all this is that I was asked to compete again next year, and I actually considered it. But thankfully, I have a husband who actually gives a crap about my health and my well-being, and quickly snapped me out of that crazy idea and brought me back to reality. So I'm working on a healthier me, and things are looking good. So thank you for all you do. And I think that's important. I get it out there. I've talked in the past about consciousness, lower levels of consciousness, higher levels of consciousness. Lower levels of consciousness are marked by a need for stimulation, validation, and attention. All the things she mentioned in this email. Higher levels of consciousness are denoted by autonomy, mastery, and purpose. When you have and you seek and you live by a deeper, higher level of consciousness that lives in seeking autonomy, mastery, and purpose, then the lower levels of consciousness fall by the wayside, the need for stimulation, validation, and attention. And I think a lot of this, the attention, especially for ladies who compete, is like a drug. And it's like she said, like, wow, no one pays attention to me on Facebook. I have, 20 friends, and all of a sudden I have 2,000. So it works like a lot like a drug. And it's ironic, too, that she also said in the email, what scares me the most is I was asked to compete again next year. Who are all these people out there soliciting women to compete? A lot of the emails I got out there was so-and-so wants me to compete. So-and-so asked me to compete. You know what? Leave people alone. I don't get where the glorification of all that comes from, but very, very weird stuff. So I'm going to get to your questions in a second, but I really wanted to cover this stuff. And then another girl wrote, she's, again, not wanting to be identified in the live, but then I got a whole list of emails, but I'll just read these couples. So I watched your webinar on Saturday. You posed a question, why are we so drawn to competing when it stands for everything we in general don't like about being women? Comparing, judging ourselves against each other. I didn't have an answer right away, but you sure got me to think about it. And the answer came to me last night. For me, it was validation. Lower level of consciousness. At that time, I needed external validation. I needed someone outside of myself to validate that I looked good, that I was committed, that I was driven and a hardworking person, and that I was worthy enough and good enough. All the things that I wasn't able to give myself. It was easier to get it from the outside world than it was to sit down with myself and dig deep and figure out what was really going on and why I felt so small and insignificant. Soon after, I realized all that validation was temporary, but by that time, I was left with more intense self-doubt and self-defeating thoughts. And where was my mindset? How was I going to fix that? Oh, then I was going to diet harder, and I was going to come in leaner, and I was going to do more cardio for the next show, until one day I finally woke up and thought, what the F am I doing? And decided it was time to break the cycle. So again, very, very important stuff. And again, that validation, external validation that works like a drug. And here's another thing about that, ladies, that you need to consider. She mentions that external validation. And what happens is it often morphs into one person or one group of people, and almost like an abusive relationship. So this is where these abusive coaches come in who they only want that validation from that one person that'll never give it to them. And so the coach becomes like an abusive spouse. Just tell me I'm good enough. Just tell me I'm good enough. Just tell me I'm good enough. And the coach is always like, you're not working hard enough. You're not lean enough. You didn't lose enough weight. You're not dieting hard. You're not trying hard enough. That kind of stuff. And I've seen that a lot in the coaching industry, where these coaches are almost like abusive spouses, and the clients are so thirsty and hungry for that one individual's validation, need for validation. And it's time to like shake that cycle and shake it free of all the damage it's doing. So those were some good responses to that, and very, very important in terms of answering to that question: what is the draw on competing? And then there's, alongside of that is the envy factor. Like today, someone wrote me and said, I'm glad I'm on a different path, but now everybody in my gym, all the ladies in my gym are getting ready for contests. It's that time of year, and it's hard for me to watch them losing weight and leaning out and all the attention they're getting. Well, that kind of envy lacks context. So don't forget, that's not all a happy, happy, joy, joy, glory, glory scenario. Believe me, as they're dieting and leaning out, their life isn't exactly happy and glorious. Sure, in the gym, everyone's making a big fuss and how they look, but don't forget what goes along with that diet by deprivation and the leaning out. I remember last year a couple coming to the gym, and the lady competed and the husband was coming to the gym all the time. And I saw him about 3 months later at the grocery store, and he came up to me. I didn't even come up to him, and he was all about, oh my God, I had to get out of the house. I mean, it's like I woke up next to a monster. I don't even recognize who this person is. So all the dieting and the irritability and the short temper, I can't take it anymore. So just because it's that time of year and in the gym, they're all glorifying it and they're all smiles. Don't forget what goes along with dieting for a contest: the constant deprivation and denial and the constant emphasis on your body and what it does to the mind. So, envy has to consider the whole package. So, and again, dieting to look good for 1 or 2 weeks a year, that makes no sense to me. But I just wanted to comment a little bit on that. And then finally, that podcast I referred to, the research is out there, folks, and it's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming that a plant-based diet is the healthiest diet on the planet. There's no debate about that at all. It's just, that's the way it is if you do the actual research, and the research that matters. All right. Research, I talked about that a lot. Research that matters, and only academics seem to know that. But a diet must, 1, be sustainable, and 2, must serve the body. And we know if you look at low carb diets over the long term, increase mortality rates, increase disease rates, increase all-cause mortality rate. It's just nonsense. So I'd like to see a study that looks at 80-year-olds and try to find any of them that are on low carb or keto diets. You won't find them, but you can find millions of various kinds of vegetarians that are post 80 years old. So very, very important. And the research is overwhelming. I can tell you where keto people go wrong, but I'm tired of lecturing about it. But I can tell you one of the studies that they like to latch onto was a 2017 study that was really limited in scope. All the things I'm talking about that doesn't pass academic credence because, 1, it was short term, only 10 weeks, and 2, it was with too small a population base. And so it had positive findings. But listen, if I put everybody out there on a 1,200 calorie diet and I called it Scott Abel relative deficit diet and could get someone to do a study on it, any kind of short-term calorie deprivation is going to result in increased health indices. All right. Just losing weight itself lowers blood pressure, lowers cardiovascular risk, all those things. So in the short term, that really doesn't say too much. You could do the same thing. I could put someone on a 1,200 calorie all carb diet, no protein, no fat, and you would see the same results. So people don't know how to read research. And then that gets confusing when you go on social media and you listen to people like that moron in the podcast who had nothing to say but opinion. And then he was completely debunked online by other real experts who actually do use academic research. And I couldn't believe in the comment section the amount of attacks that they were getting from people calling them biased when they're producing all the research. Anyway, enough of that ranting. But I wish the next study would be a study on people of retirement age and older. And show me any that have been eating a keto or low carb diet that are still alive, 75 to 85 years old. You won't find one, but you can find all kinds of vegetarians, some that just don't eat red meat, some are pure vegan, whatever, that are in their 80s and thriving. So that's the study that I look for. And, hopefully we'll see that down the road somewhere. I think it'll be a great study. So that's my preamble, folks. And now I will get to your question. So Jason is just saying, just tuning in. I've always wondered about aerobic fitness, not for fat loss, because we already know the aerobic myth if you've read my book, but for overall wellness. I've heard lower intensity work for longer durations are beneficial, but truthfully, I'd rather continue following something like Hard Gainer Solution or one of your programs, but I have concerns on longevity. Well, no question of health benefits of aerobic activity, just not fat burning benefits. Or, if you only have time to choose one of the two, then resistance training makes the most sense. There are, benefits to aerobic training, none of which are cosmetic. And that's the mistake so many people make out there. I was trying to work also into this webinar. A client sent me a picture yesterday. He's in Key Biscayne, Florida. And he sent me a picture, but he took it the wrong way, so I couldn't use it on here because it was too stretched out and it wouldn't work. But along these lines, here he is at the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne, Florida. And he sent me a picture because it reminded him of one of my my lectures and one of my podcasts. So he took a picture inside the hotel gym, which was really nice, like a really nice Ritz-Carlton gym. All the aerobic equipment being used, all of it. And yet it was 80 degrees outside, not a cloud in the sky, with miles of beach and even a paved boardwalk. Why aren't people outside walking? I mean, what is the draw to being inside, looking out the window at the beach and the water, instead of actually being out there? And not to mention not reaping the benefits of that if you're from a different climate and you get the situational hypermetabolic effects that I've talked about before. So I wanted to use that picture. Unfortunately, it wasn't usable. But again, it's a head shaker. I don't know what magic people think is walking on a treadmill, Stairmaster, or a bike. And again, all this aerobic equipment was full. And they're all looking out the window at the ocean on a completely sunny day, 80 degrees. Makes no sense. And there's no advantage to it either. So in terms of cardiovascular health, Jason, yes, there's cardiovascular benefits. But remember, all training is cardiovascular in nature. Not all training is aerobic. And that's the difference. So you can get health benefits from just doing strength training. And like you said, my Hard Gainer Solution is a good way of doing that, because you're getting peripheral heart action, shunting blood to different muscles at the same time, dilates the muscles and the blood vessels, makes them very healthy and pliable. So you get that effect that way. Hopefully I answered that question. Jason, you can always follow up if you want. Abdul is just saying, hey, Scott, how does one treat functional imbalance in muscles in the limbs, for example? Well, it depends. I mean, functional imbalance, again, I struggle with this one because this industry likes to overemphasize anything, especially if that's how you yourself make your living. So if someone is making their living off of telling you about imbalances, then they're going to overemphasize the situation. And the example I've always used in that is someone who plays tennis. All right. If someone who plays tennis and uses their racket in their right hand, then no matter what they do, they're going to be right dominant. So why would you want to correct that, have to correct that, spend time trying to correct that? There's no imbalances there in terms of the demands of that particular sport. And functional imbalances are often overstated. In other words, unless it prevents you from doing something or puts you at a really high injury risk for day-to-day activity, then the situation itself doesn't need a whole lot of emphasis in terms of correction. I think it's overstated a lot. Now, along those lines, one of the questions I got just recently was from a lady who ordered a one-time diet, and then because of implants, etc., and didn't like the look of how striated she was in the chest area, made the statement that she didn't want any chest work with the next program. That's a mistake, because that produces the kind of imbalance that would invite injury or overuse conditions in other areas, because you would end up strengthening around the shoulder joint, strengthening the muscles of the shoulder and the back, and you wouldn't in the anterior chain. And then that could produce all kinds of invites to injury or imbalances that would be hard to get through. So that's an important thing to consider. So functional imbalance would depend on, are you doing something either in your work or your training that requires that function be restored, or at least be put on a more even keel? If not, not really too big a deal, actually. It's overstated. Now, Carolyn, you're saying, how often do I offer these? Do you mean these webinars? Because they're weekly. I'm not sure if you want to specify maybe your question a little more delineated. I'll be happy to answer. But I think obviously you're asking about these webinars. They're once a week, usually at this time every week, although I might change it. So hopefully that's what you're asking about. If so, that's the answer. If it's about something I mentioned earlier in my ranting, then by all means, just write back. So Daniel's just saying, my son recently began the cycle diet and has seen what I believe is a proper process. That is, after almost 2 months, he's beginning to see the results. Although this is not a question, it only makes one wonder why the mindset of denial and diet industry isn't questioned. Well, I question it, Daniel. I question it all the time. I call it the North American diet mentality madness, and I talk about it all the time. We live in a world of food abundance, so our mindsets must be inclusive of that, not exclusive of that. You can never, ever pretend that you're not going to look at or want a hyper-palatable food ever again. That's just not realistic, and it's not how our minds evolved. If you look at my books, Understanding Metabolism or Beyond Metabolism, like most mammals, our brains evolved to see food, want food. So to try to think that you can override hardware with software, especially North American diet mentality madness software, is a losing proposition, and that's what ends up bearing out food issues, eating disorders, etc. For instance, someone wrote me a few weeks back wondering about a specific diet that a spouse had a daughter on. And that is a danger zone. To put a young, impressionable mind on a diet is basically a pathway to an eating disorder. It's a lot like saying this is conditional love. So actually put the child on 2 days of fasting and 2 days of keto, and I don't know what the rest of it was because it was all nonsense. But when a parent puts a child on a diet, you are putting them on a pathway to an eating disorder and a lifetime of food and weight issues. Not advisable at all. So, yeah, very, very, yeah. Jason is just saying, whoa, that's very interesting regarding plant-based diets. If you want to follow up, Jason, I'll be happy to include. I see you did. I'll get to that. Eddie's just saying, do you ever use a heart rate monitor while lifting weights? No, never. It's not necessary. What external cue is that telling me that I'm going to benefit from? If you read my book, The Abel Approach, we talk a lot about external cues versus internal cues, qualitative versus quantitative emphasis. And again, whenever I get this question, I use the Einstein quote. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So we are overemphasizing quantification in this industry to no avail. Just recently, there was an expert interviewed who's been saying what I've been saying for 30 years now about tempo training. What a bunch of outside-in nonsense. That's not how time under tension is meant to work. Quality of time under tension is what matters, and that usually happens by achieving what's called total activation potential, which is muscles under resistance and stretch receive the most overload. So things like that are what matter. So Jason's just saying, makes me sad about keto success. Someone loses the initial weight rapidly and think they're on their way. Over time, they bounce back hard and get back to the original weight. Now they are afraid of carbs and keep banging their head against the wall. Yeah, staying on keto, and they never actually learn how to adjust their nutrition for their goals. Yeah, keto is becoming the new tribe, religious tribe out there. And every time I comment on it, I get attacked. I can't believe the level of religiosity now that is being attached to diet mentality. And these people are going to be, like you said, Jason, they're going to be in for quite a rebound. I doubt even 10% of them will keep the weight off. The first time I posted about keto madness, and you can go to my YouTube channel for a whole series I did called Low Carb Lies and the Politics for Profits. But the first time I did, again, some of the moronic, idiotic comments that you end up getting. I remember one that stood out in my mind was the person saying, I done keto twice and it worked both times. Well, if it worked even the first time, you wouldn't have to do it twice. That doesn't even make sense. So a diet has to be sustainable, has to serve the body. And if a diet strategy works, you don't go back off it and on it. It doesn't, that comment didn't even make sense. So this is the kind of shelf life that you get out there. And like I said in last week's webinar, we've seen this show before. You know, this is just Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4. This is just Atkins all dressed up in more sophistication. But it's not going anywhere. And when you look at these things long term, the studies are out there. Long-term efficacy of keto diet is that compromises metabolism. You lose more lean mass than you do fat mass. There's more rebound, and it's not in terms of long-term health, all kinds of risks. This was another that idiot calling himself a doctor on that podcast who meat-only diet. One of the nonsensical things he was saying that automatically ruled him out is he referred to, as most low carbers do, the Inuits. Now, this has been debunked a gazillion times now, but low carbers like to talk about the Inuit Eskimos who live in a society where there's no veggies and there's no fruits, and they live on, you know, nothing but animal blubber, whale blubber, and meat, blah, 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 blah. This has been debunked over and over again. They don't have heart disease. Actually, they have severe atherosclerosis. When they did autopsies on them, they die very, very young, like extremely young. I think the mean average age of when they were dying was 27 years old. And severe osteopenia and osteoporosis. So when a low-carb so-called presenting himself as an expert comes on and uses that when it's been debunked over and over and over again, I can't believe these people aren't even vetted. And people who were, you know, spewing this stuff out don't even know that this stuff has been debunked. I mean, that is just ridiculous. So they often refer to that. And if you want to look at population-based density studies like meta-analysis does, that I often refer to, those are my favorite kind of studies, cross-cultural. Well, the Inuit population is very, very tiny to begin with. So, and the other thing, here's the really important thing for keto arguers out there. What they found by studying the Inuit, they wouldn't even have survived at all, except for this one very, very important thing. They have a gene, enzyme expression that prevents them from getting into ketosis. So even when they studied them from not being able to eat any carbs or anything, they never reached ketosis. They never got into ketosis. A certain gene and enzyme specific to their evolution prevented them from getting into ketosis, which is probably what prevented them from dying, even though records show high rates of atherosclerosis, high rates of osteoporosis and osteopenia, and not very long lives. So again, a 1-2 bitch slap to the keto people who want to use that when it's been debunked in the research. And it doesn't take, we're not talking about PhD level research here. This is something you can find in a Google search. So again, just head shaking. James is just saying, Coach, since I've been following you, I've been amazed at how much I've learned. Thank you. However, I've been even more amazed about how much I've had to de-learn related to health and fitness. I personally think that if one doesn't open themselves up to ridding themselves of the fitness myths, bro science, and lies, you'll never get to the process of learning. How important do you value deprogramming in the learning process, especially as it relates to fitness? Well, I think Einstein said unlearning is the highest form of learning, and that information is not knowledge. And I think a lot of wannabes out there, they do a 10, 20-minute Google search. Like I said earlier, they listen to a podcast without vetting it. They trust what they hear. They trust what they read on social media. They don't know how to read research, and they tend to follow biblically the first thing that strikes them. So they can't abandon that one thing. They anchor to it. And that's problematic. But the first thing, as an academic, James, you're a doctor, you know this, the first thing you're taught in academia is to knock that chip off your shoulder. So me being a sociologist by nature and by education, what happened there is you were taught what objectivity truly is, what research bias is, how to try to be objective, reach for objectivity. One of the things that we did, I remember in my sociology of law class, it was a really, really cool experience for me. I talk about it a lot. We would be at a rectangular table, and the third week of every month in my sociology of law class, what would happen is third-year law students would come to our sociology of law class, and the sociology students, like me, would sit on one side of the table, and the law students would sit on the other side of the table, and we would have to argue a cultural point from legal and sociological standpoint. But here's the kicker: we never knew which side we were going to have to take. So the law students would get there, and I remember the first week we were all set to take the sociological argument, and the professor said, well, I hope you're all ready, because the sociologists, you're going to argue the legal side, and you law students, you're going to argue the moral side, the sociological side, and have at it. So, and we would have 3 hours of debating what we actually didn't believe. And that was a very, very good lesson. But what I find now, James, is yes, people are now, we live in a world where facts don't matter anymore. So, we like to say you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. And what we see is facts don't matter. Like last week, people don't realize on my YouTube channel, I've got my comments set to approval or non-approval, because unlike other people on YouTube, I really don't care about the numbers that I'm getting. I care about putting out a message that I believe in. So I'm not going to entertain the flip side of that message, especially if it's moronic or idiotic. So a couple of people last week were attacking me about keto, telling me what a scumbag I was and all this other stuff, and where's my research, even though I've been presenting research for months. All they had to do was watch a few previous episodes. And yet they offered no research of their own. They just called me names and said how biased and prejudiced I was, and I should shame on myself. And so I just not approve, delete. So they wasted a lot of time. So that's my way of trying to get around it, James, is to just stick hard to my message and put it out there. And when I can, put it out there with the research. But after listening to that nonsensical podcast that has millions of followers, and unfortunately, millions of people that are going to believe this idiot, and then watching the actual people with academic integrity that followed that up and basically pointed out this guy's ridiculous comments that had no basis in fact or research, pointed out that he lost his medical license, pointed out, and then they were getting attacked. So it's like, it's like we now have religious dogma in the world of nutrition, where people are creating sort of a Bible-like following, and it's like telling them that their nutritional God doesn't exist, and they don't want to hear it, even with the mountains of research. And the research, like I said, it's overwhelming that a plant-based diet serves the body and is sustainable, and not only does that, but does that on a level that is unparalleled to any other kind of diet out there. Not calorie restriction, not anything. So just Abdullah follow-up. Usually he refers to certain workouts where one arm gives up faster than the other one does, and so on. Well, that's not really an imbalance. That's an innervation problem. I wouldn't call that imbalance, Abdullah. That's very... we all have strong and weak body parts. This is all explained in my book, The Abel Approach, that muscles that innervate the easiest, that have the lowest threshold for excitation, will be the most active and will be the most easy to respond muscles. So you will see people will have strong body parts and weak body parts, and usually their weak body parts are close to a body part that's very easy to respond, because that body part ends up doing most of the work because it has a lower threshold for excitation. So that's one of the things that's in there. So Ian's just saying, currently on the cycle diet and love it. Always like to hear that. Just did my second refeed. First was just a free meal. All right, so you tested the waters. That's pretty smart. 6 days later, I was 1 pound below my weight before I had the spike meal. Try explaining that to normal dieters. The second was a half-day refeed done 8 days later, 7 to 10 days. Good. Excited to see how my weight reacts 7 days from now. And that's the other thing about the cycle diet. It's fun to do that, especially at first. I mean, I don't have to do that anymore. Andy doesn't have to do that anymore. But it's really fun in the beginning to do that stuff, right? To have a refeed and, oh, I gained 12 pounds. I'm wondering what happens 6 days from now. Oh, I've lost 15. That stuff's fun. So my question is, what is the likelihood of putting on lean mass dieting this way? Well, depending on how sound your programs are and how progressive they are, meaning that, you know, when you finish one program, the next one makes sense as a follow-up to the current program, and that means it's progressive and it's proper, then that's really, really important, you know, in terms of getting you know, putting on lean mass as you go along. So being lean is all about diet. Putting on lean mass is all about proper progressive training. And that's programs, not workouts. That's a big difference there. So Matt's just saying, tell me again why doing slow controlled reps are not productive. Well, you have to understand that there's various kinds of strength. There's starting strength, explosive strength, limit strength, speed strength, explosive strength, starting strength being maximum instantaneous fiber recruitment, explosive strength being an ability to use recruited fibers till they're no longer needed. Total activation potential, activating high threshold motor units, has to do with the degree of effort expended. So when you're artificially lowering a weight, you're not really keeping it under the time under tension in terms of the physiology of the body. That's an external outside in thing that really has no bearing on how muscles respond to overload and proper overload. So that's about the best way to explain that. And again, what I say to everybody, Matt, is bodybuilding 101, go and watch Pumping Iron on Netflix or whatever, and watch. There isn't a single fantastic world-class level bodybuilder in that movie, The Days Before Growth Hormone and Insulin, that's doing any kind of tempo nonsense and writing little notes in books and all that other stuff. It's all about pumping the iron and doing so in a cadence that's explosive where applicable, or constant tension otherwise. So you don't need numbers to do that. Again, the numbers actually take you away from the mind-muscle connection. Who was it recently that was talking about that? I think it was Brad Schofield, or so, I'm not sure his name. He's a researcher that was basically talking the same stuff I talk about in the mind-muscle connection, and that numbers remove you from that. And that's all in my book, The Abel Approach, and you can check that out. I explain that in a lot more detail. So Jason's just saying, totally random question, what's your favorite posing routine? I've always loved Frank Zane, 83 Olympia, blown away by Kai Green. Well, you know what? I don't really follow it anymore, Jason. So I really couldn't I really couldn't say. I guess the favorite, I'm trying to, oh, there's a guy I'm thinking of from the old days, and I can't think of his name right now, but John Brown, I think was his name. He was the first to really do like with a fantastic body. Before him was Russ Testo. But if you go to my YouTube channel and you see my guest posing appearances, I would have to say mine, because I did characters. So I did one as the Mask, I did one as Chucky, and I tried to tell a story. So you know, and that's all gone now. Nobody, I mean, now you need a posing coach and figure to turn 4 times, which makes no sense to me at all. Like you need a coach to tell you how to turn sideways. I was doing 4-minute routines choreographed to music without a coach or choreographer. But again, this is what we do now. We overcomplicate what's simple and we try to simplify what's complicated. So Nelson is just saying, I was put by my father, 11 years old, 700 calorie diet. Ouch. This was 1980. You just described my life, 30 years of dieting and compulsive eating. I went from probably 30 pounds overweight to 130 pounds overweight. My life and my psychic pain my whole life. No, he's old and regretting it. I'm sorry to hear that, Nelson. This is usually happens to females, unfortunately. But yeah, this is parents putting their child on diets is basically like telling them that they're under conditional love, and basically that you're not acceptable the way you are. And if your parents that you look to are giving you that message, then it's really hard for you to have self-acceptance when your parents are basically saying, you know, you're not good enough the way you are. Yeah, I mean, so Nelson's just saying now he's old and regretting it. I have a whole food issues, eating issues course coming out, Nelson, when I can finally get around to finishing it up. So, you know, maybe that'll help you, but I see a lot of this. So when people write me now saying, you know, they've got their kid on this diet or that diet, it just sends shivers right through my spine. So, that's unfortunate. So there's no, that's a life inside the thin cage is what you're commenting on there, Nelson. My heart goes out to you. Sorry to hear that. And hopefully you're realizing that the diet mentality, you know, is the definition of insanity, right? Keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. So your thoughts on tuna and mercury levels in it? I was approached by someone, and this person tried to educate me. Eating tuna every day is not good because of the mercury levels. I love it, eating them almost every day with no issues. Well, that kind of mineral poisoning, you're not going to have issues in a gradual basis, I don't think. I eat tuna right now 3 times a week. I'm reconsidering that, but for other reasons. I don't really have a problem with it if the tuna is drained, but you know, just on terms of I don't know. I mean, I would say don't worry too much about it. People like that tend to be a little orthorexic, or they just like to sound like they're more in the know. There's something to it. I don't know if there's a lot to it, but just in terms of eco-friendliness and eco-reality, though, 80% of marine wildlife is gone, and we should take that under consideration with our food and eating habits. So in a population that's growing, 80% disappearance of marine life and their ecosystem is drama for us down the road, to be sure. So Carolyn's just saying so many people do not eat fruit because of the sugar content. What are the benefits of fruit? I mean, I could do a whole webinar on the benefits of fruit. It depends on the fruit, but as a family group, vitamins, nutrients, phytonutrients, phytochemicals, micronutrients, fiber, it goes on and on and on. The benefits of fruit are, as fruits are the essence of life. So the sugar content, first of all, that's not sugar content. This is where people don't know what the hell they're talking about. The fructose that's broken down in a whole fruit is a lot different than fructose used as an additive to process food. And we need to stop doing that. Another thing that idiot, moronic, keto, low carb dieters do is they look at research that talks about refined carbohydrate like soda and potato chips and things like that, and then says, see, carbs are bad. No, processed foods are bad. So that's like me pointing to paleo and seeing research that says too much Kentucky Fried Chicken will give you hardening of the arteries, and then me going, see, you shouldn't be eating lean proteins. It's ridiculous. So sorry, Carolyn, but whoever's telling you that doesn't know shit from putty. You know, send them my way and I'll point it out to them. But what are the benefits of fruit? What aren't the benefits of fruit? Supportive carbohydrate, healthy, nutrient dense, light in terms of they're low in caloric density. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And depending on the fruit, you get a variant in nutritional components. So it's the wellness of life. So very, very important. And Andy's here. I should have brought Andy into the conversation, actually. Andy's just saying, I've been living the cycle diet lifestyle now for 12 years. Definitely improved my physique over that time. That's in the response to the question, can you put on lean mass? I forget who asked me that question, lean mass with the cycle diet. But if you go to my YouTube page, I have a sticky video there that shows Andy as the ultimate hard gainer. Or if you go to absbyandy.com, you'll see Andy as tall and skinny, and then you'll see him as we bulked him up, and then you'll see that you know, he got on the cover of magazines, etc., by being you know, on a regular cycle diet for all these years now. So and not to mention how optimized his metabolism is. So it's a joy to watch him eat. It's like a circus event. So Mike's just saying, Scott, do you do any form of meditation? Do you subscribe or suggest individuals do meditation? Depends on the individual, Mike. I know people that are doing forms of meditation that they wouldn't consider forms of meditation. In one of my books, the example I use, my ex-wife, she does what she calls a greet the morning walk every day. She's a walker, but she doesn't have headphones. She just walks. And I know for her, that's a form of what I call active meditation. So do you really need to be sitting with your legs crossed? And I think, you know, again, we get into vogue trends. So meditation can come in many forms, and it can be active. And like I've said before, any place where you can go empty your mind, the Zen expression that your mind should be like an empty rice bowl. If it's full, the universe can't come along and fill it. So sometimes forms of activity, exercise, things you like doing, are forms of meditation. I talked about this in my book. I think it's my book, Zen Fitness and Tao Health, where I was talking about how my workouts and my exercise lifestyle does that for me. When I get to the gym is that place where everything else becomes nothing. And in that time I'm there, that nothing becomes everything. And you're never going to experience that if you're on your phone during your workout and you got music blaring in your head during the work. You're never going to understand what I'm talking about. But other people do. And in my book, I explained, I had neighbors now, former neighbors, but my neighbor to the left is into antique cars. So he's out there tinkering on engines for hours at a time, doing this, doing that. He's underneath the car on his back, and then that for him is a form of meditation. And my neighbor on the other side of me, former neighbor on the other side of me, was heavily into gardening, and she would be out there for hours at a time, pruning and hands and knees. What would be work to me was actually, mind clearing, mind emptying activity for her. So I would call that a form of meditation. So yes, I'm all for it, but people aren't going to find that in our world of being stimulus addicts. I mean, we can't even leave our phones alone for 40 minutes while we're in the gym. So how are people going to meditate? I mean, I got visions now of people in the lotus position with their phone on the floor in front of them, just in case. That's not meditation. When you're such a stimulus addict that you're looking at your phone before it even beeps or whatever it does to notify you, I think that's a sign of societal sickness, not societal health. So that's really important. And my old friend Dave Boussier is just saying, good evening, fine sir. Well, you know better than that, buddy. What's your thoughts on us individuals 50 and over using glucosamine and chondroitin, does it work? I'm needing some joint therapy in my maturing years. Actually, no, it doesn't work. There's plenty of research on that. Now, one of the other things I talked about also to do with that, I talked about before, is getting off of fish oils. I couldn't believe way back when I was buying into that nonsense. And you can read my article. There's something fishy about fish oils to find out what I'm talking about. But I have, of course, very bad osteoarthritis in both of my shoulders, which, of course, if you have osteoarthritis, it's never going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And I've managed to manage it for over a decade, which I'm pretty proud of. But one of the first improvements I noticed, Dave, was I got off of fish oils, and within 2 weeks, something happened where the inflammation was down in both shoulders. And of course, my rotator cuff work that you can find on my YouTube channel as well, at the end of each workout, doing either internal or external rotations with cables or tubing, and or doing scarecrows, things like that will help. But there's really no supplement. That's just people trying to scam people out of their money. The only thing that might work, depending on how bad it is getting cortisone shots, but you're limited in how often you can do that. So that's really important too. So hopefully that helped, buddy. Good to hear from you. Lauren is saying, what's your opinion on deli meat? No deli meats, no cured meats of any kind. That's like the lower level stuff. I mean, if it's a cheat day, refeed day, then anything goes. But yeah, that's the easy answer to that. And that's an easy answer. Trust me. Andy's just saying meditation, answering your question, Mike. Anything that you can lose yourself in, where time ceases to exist, is a form of meditation. So, and anything that by doing that, you feel replenished in doing so. So how many people out there now with the North American mentality are out there exhausting themselves in some kind of process? They're not invigorated. They're not rebooted. They're not rejuvenated. They're not any of those things from what they're involved in. Instead, they're just depleted and exhausted, and somehow that's supposed to be a good thing. Yeah, so very, very important. Let me get to, sorry, I'm losing my place here. I'm glad I'm having this question and answer session, folks. I'm glad you people are on board. Jason, what do you think of Vince Gironda, more specifically his exercise choice? And well, to be honest, Jason, I don't want to insult anybody from the past, but there were more than a few gurus of the past that were not built on substance. Let me just put it that way. And Vince was one of them. He's like overblown since his passing, what he had to say and how brilliant he was for saying it. I would call him misguided more than anything if you look at his stuff and what we know now. But of course, I'll get attacked for saying that. And then a few gurus later on that I actually knew personally were more pathetic in real life than they were in terms of being glorified in the magazines. Full-blown alcoholism and just not very nice people. And so the reality is a lot different than the presentation, especially before the years of social media, where magazines could glorify personas that way. So, less than impressed. But you have to remember, Jason, that Bill Pearl was my mentor, and Bill Pearl was the real deal, is the real deal as a human being first, and as a man second, and as a bodybuilder and diplomat for an ambassador for fitness after that. So I was pretty spoiled that way. But so I don't know, for what it's worth. Matt's just saying, after decades of coaching, what fulfills you the most? What's your why for coaching? Well, my why for coaching, is still it's still how I earn my income. And I think it's because of, I'm trying to fill a gap of, trying to be someone who responds to intelligence over nonsense. Nonsense is taking over. It probably always has. But there is a place out there for people who understand expertise when they hear it, understand intelligence when they hear it. They understand support and accountability in a positive way, constructive way when they hear it. So that's it. But I cease to be motivated by those things, Matt. That's not the things that float my boat. Really, my boat is floated by my existence, waking up every morning and happy that I'm still here. Deciding how much, the Zen dilemma is always how much time to devote to earning your day versus how much time to devote to enjoying your day. That is the Zen dilemma. So, that's my motivating factor now. So, Rui's just saying lean ground turkey is a source of protein. It's okay. If it's ground from the breast, then that's fine. But I got some scary stuff coming out on, down the road. I'm still working on it, but there's some scary stuff out there about poultry in terms of salmonella and other things. And just the production of it is, it can be pretty scary stuff. So I'm saving that for another time. But I'll get to that. But ground turkey, I guess so. I mean, the leaner the protein source, the better. Look, contrary to low carb nonsense, the less saturated fat you have taking into your body, the better. So that's, again, this is not debated in the actual real research. Okay. So unless it's research funded by the meat and dairy corporations, but it's pretty clear that the less saturated fat you eat, the better off you're going to be. And of course, the less processed food you eat, the better off you're going to be. So it's not rocket science, but unfortunately, it has to be repeated because of so much misinformation getting out there. So, that's really important stuff too. So, Booster, good to hear from you again, man. At our age, that's what happens. I mean, just, there's a price to be paid for any kind of lifestyle, folks. So, years and years in the trenches of hanging and banging, look at football players in their 40s and 50s. I mean, if you've played any kind of sport at a high end, Fred Hatfield used to say there's no such thing as a healthy sport. And we look at something as non-invasive as golf, and how many surgeries has Tiger Woods had, like 7 or 8 or something. So, that's just the price you pay for a lifestyle you love. But you can, people that don't work out at our age can put their backs out just bending over or they can die shoveling snow. So, we just have to make it a smarter, more worthy trade-off when we're in our 50s. So my book, Physique After 50, spells a lot of things that we shouldn't be doing in the gym after age 50, whether you're having repercussions of previous exercise lifestyle or not. You might want to check out my book, Physique After 50. And more to the point of the meditation question, Mike, my other book, my other book about aging, the aging proposition, people might want to check that out as well, in terms of just sort of a mind, body, spirit kind of triangle of awareness, emotional, mental, and physical well-being at our age, and what it is and what it isn't, and how to live it. So hopefully that helps. So looks like the comments are done. Hopefully you guys benefited from tonight's episode. Hopefully you did, and you were hitting your share buttons and your emoticons and all that kind of stuff. So looks like there's no more questions coming in. I like doing the question and answer. Sometimes I will formulate and give you some research, but other times I'll just rant. MD Physical Medicine Coaching. I wish I knew who you actually were. Just says, thank you, Coach. Very generous of you to volunteer your expertise like this. I like trying to be a voice of reason in an unreasonable world, a voice of rationality in an irrational world. But sometimes even I can't take it. Like I said, that podcast with the guy, celebrating 1 year of eating nothing but meat, which I think he was lying about anyway. But, that's too bad that misinformation gets spread that way. But so be it. So anyway, you can find me here every week, and you can, you can go to my YouTube channel where these are posted, and there's various playlists there as well from way back 10 years ago up till now. So again, hopefully you guys benefited. And each time you come on, hit your emoticons. Apparently Facebook likes that and invites more of that. So, here's a good question just before I go. Vascular occlusion training, again, just forget about all that stuff. If you have to do that to make gains, then you're probably, should take up checkers or chest. It's nonsense. Don't bother with that stuff. I mean, all that stuff is a bunch of hokey pokey. So yeah, very, very, forget all that stuff. The more complicated something is, the more likely it's nonsense. So, don't forget, Einstein said, simplicity is the truth and the truth is simple. So, yeah, forget all that stuff. So Allie's just saying physical medicine MD too. Appreciate you. Well, thank you, Allie. You're new. I think you're new. Nice having you here. So by all means, as far as it stands right now, folks, I will be here this time every Saturday night, because that's what I do on Saturday nights at my age. That's my level of excitement. So anyway, that's it for tonight. Thank you for being there, and hopefully I'll see you all next week. And you'll hit your share buttons. Send me your questions, and I'll be happy to answer them next webinar and see what I'll be up to next week. So thanks for being there, and I will see you all later.